He stepped onto the gleaming private jet, the cool air brushing against his plain white t-shirt and worn jeans. Daniel Hartman carried only a small backpack, his expression calm but slightly hesitant. As he quietly moved toward his seat, a sharp voice sliced through the luxurious hum of the cabin. "Excuse me, sir," the flight attendant snapped, her navy blue uniform crisp and immaculate. Vanessa Cooper, the chief attendant, looked him up and down with a mix of confusion and disdain. "Are you sure you're supposed to be on this aircraft?" Passengers turned their heads. Some whispered, others chuckled under their breath. Daniel, unsure whether to respond or not, simply held out his boarding pass. Vanessa snatched it, scrutinized it with a frown, and then, still unconvinced, shook her head. "I'm sorry, but this flight is reserved for special clients." "You must have made a mistake," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The humiliation burned hot across Daniel's cheeks. He felt dozens of eyes judging him, his simple clothes, his modest demeanor. It didn't matter that he had every right to be there. In their eyes, he didn't belong. A man in a dark tailored suit, seated toward the front, Blake Anderson, observed silently, his face unreadable. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside until we verify your reservation," Vanessa insisted, already guiding Daniel back toward the cabin door with a pointed finger. Daniel opened his mouth to explain but closed it again. What would be the point? In this world, appearances spoke louder than any words. Swallowed by shame, he clutched his backpack tighter and moved without protest. Behind him, a few passengers smirked and shook their heads. One woman whispered, "Probably sneaked in for a free ride." It was a moment Daniel would never forget, not because of the public humiliation, but because of the quiet decision forming in his heart, to hold on, to endure, even when every fiber in him ached to walk away from it all. But something else was brewing, something no one on that plane could have anticipated. Tomorrow, everything would change. Beneath his quiet demeanor and modest appearance, Daniel Hartman carried the weight of 1,000 silent victories. He wasn't just a simple man lost among the wealthy. He was the heartbeat behind a movement that had changed lives across continents. Years earlier, Daniel had founded Wings of Hope, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing emergency airlifts for critically ill children in remote and impoverished areas. What had started as a single donated helicopter evolved into a global fleet, rescuing over 15,000 children who would have otherwise been forgotten. It all began after a trip to a small village in South America, where Daniel had witnessed a young boy die simply because the nearest hospital was hundreds of miles away. That night, under a sky full of indifferent stars, Daniel made a vow. No child should ever be abandoned by geography. Without investors or family fortune, he worked construction jobs by day and studied aviation logistics by night. Piece by piece, dream by dream, he built something miraculous. Daniel's name rarely appeared in headlines. He didn't care for awards, and he politely declined interviews. For him, every life saved was the only recognition he ever wanted. Those who knew him personally spoke of his kindness, his relentless drive, and the way he remembered every child's name, even years later. One such story was of Marisol Ortega, a 10-year-old girl with a rare heart condition. Her tiny village had no access to medical care, and a storm had washed out the only road. Daniel himself piloted the rescue flight, battling fierce winds to bring Marisol to safety. After her successful surgery, she would often send him hand-drawn thank you notes, notes that Daniel kept neatly folded in the inside pocket of his jacket, closest to his heart. In moments of doubt, he would unfold them, tracing the crayons, lines as if anchoring himself to his purpose. But no one aboard that luxurious jet knew any of this. To them, he was just a man in cheap clothes, misplaced in a world of status and image. If only they had looked beyond the surface, they might have seen the quiet giant sitting among them. And yet, Daniel wasn't there for validation. He had come for something else, something far more personal and life-changing. The very next day, the truth would surface in a way none of them could have predicted. The following morning broke with a brilliant sunrise, the golden light painting the runway, in hues of hope and redemption. While most passengers disembarked from the flight without giving Daniel a second glance, something monumental was already in motion. In the distance, a sleek silver private jet, far more grand than the one Daniel had been humiliated on, made its descent. Its logo bore an elegant emblem, a pair of wings cradling a small heart. Wings of hope. Passengers and crew alike gathered near the windows, their curiosity piqued. Rumors buzzed, whispers of royalty, of billionaires arriving. The jet's door opened with a soft hiss, and out stepped Elizabeth Monroe Hartman, Daniel's wife, a formidable figure known for her empire in humanitarian technology and aviation. Elizabeth, dressed in an understated yet elegant cream suit, exuded the kind of quiet power that commanded respect without demanding it. Gasps echoed through the terminal as Elizabeth ignored the curious glances and made her way directly to Daniel, still waiting near the boarding gate with nothing but his small backpack slung over his shoulder. Her face lit up at the sight of him, her steps quickening until she wrapped him in a tender, heartfelt embrace. Only then did Blake Anderson, the founder of the airline and a legend in the aviation industry, step forward, his expression somber. In a voice filled with regret, he addressed Daniel with the utmost respect. "Mr. Hartman, please accept my sincerest apologies on behalf of my staff. It was not only a grave mistake, it was a lesson we should all take to heart." Vanessa Cooper, standing among the crew, paled visibly. She clutched the hem of her uniform jacket, the gravity of her actions settling like a stone in her chest. But Daniel did not gloat. He did not retaliate. Instead, he smiled gently, that same warm, humble smile that had comforted so many over the years. "I believe," Daniel said softly, "that everyone deserves a second chance, just as every child deserves a chance to live." At that moment, the room seemed to breathe differently. Status melted away, titles lost their meaning, and for the first time, people saw Daniel Hartman not for his clothes, not for his possessions, but for the heart that beat within him. News outlets would later pick up the story, headlines proclaiming, "The simple man who carried the world on his shoulders." But Daniel didn't care about the articles or the sudden fame. His mind was already elsewhere, dreaming of new villages to reach, new lives to save, because for Daniel, every sunrise was a new chance to make the world just a little bit kinder. And this was only the beginning of what the world would come to learn about the man they once overlooked. That night, in the sterile silence of a hotel room overlooking the city skyline, Daniel Hartman sat at the edge of the bed, his hands resting heavily on his knees. The sting of humiliation clung to him like a second skin. He replayed the scene, over and over in his mind, the judgmental glances, the whispered insults, the cold finality of Vanessa's finger pointing him toward the exit. For the first time in a long while, Daniel questioned everything. Maybe they're right, he thought bitterly. Maybe people only see value in what they can measure, in titles, in clothes, in money. His heart, once so full of quiet certainty, now ached with disillusionment. He had given so much of himself. Years of sacrifice, countless sleepless nights, thousands of miles traveled to reach forgotten children, and yet all it took was a glance, a smirk, a single moment of prejudice to make him feel invisible. Was it still worth it? 1,000 times he'd told himself that goodness mattered, that the world could change one small kindness at a time. But sitting there, under the weight of shame, he felt that belief slipping away, thread by thread. "Why do I even bother?" he whispered to the empty room. The city lights blinked outside, indifferent. Somewhere far below, people moved through their lives, unaware of the silent battle raging inside him. He picked up his backpack, the same one he always carried, worn, faded, stitched up in places by his own hands. Inside it were the tokens of his journey, letters from children he'd helped, photos of families he'd reunited, a bracelet made by Marisol Ortega herself. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Daniel pulled out Marisol's latest letter. It was written in Spanish, her handwriting clumsy but earnest. It read, "Nunca dejes de volar, Daniel. Tú eres nuestras alas. Never stop flying, Daniel. You are our wings." Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring the ink. In that moment, Daniel realized something profound. His worth had never depended on how others saw him. It was written in the lives he had touched, in the dreams he had made possible, in the tiny, fierce hearts that believed in him when the world did not. He wasn't doing it for recognition. He never had. The cruelness of strangers could bruise him. Yes, it could shake his faith, but it could never define him. He was a builder of bridges, a lifter of souls, and no first-class seat, no tailored suit. No haughty glance could ever diminish that truth. The simple man they had humiliated was, in reality, a man made of steel, stitched together by hope and resilience, and tomorrow he would rise again. The next morning, Daniel stood before the hotel mirror, staring at his reflection. His eyes, though still shadowed with fatigue, held a steadiness that had returned overnight, a quiet defiance against the weight of judgment. He slipped on his simple white t-shirt once more, the fabric soft from years of wear, and pulled the backpack over his shoulders. No designer suit, no flashy watch, just himself, raw, unarmored, and yet somehow stronger than before. As he exited the hotel, a breeze caught the edge of a newspaper resting on a bench. The headline screamed of another scandal, another betrayal of trust among the rich and powerful. Daniel shook his head, a bitter smile playing at his lips. In a world so obsessed with status, he thought, perhaps the greatest rebellion was to remain kind. His phone buzzed. A message from Elizabeth. Landing in 1 hour. Can't wait to see you. Love you. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of those words wash over him. Elizabeth, the woman who had seen his soul when others had only seen his shoes. Together, they had built a life defined not by opulence, but by purpose. Daniel made his way back toward the airport, his steps slow but certain. The memory of the previous day's humiliation still lingered, a sour taste at the back of his mind. Yet with every step, he reclaimed a piece of himself. When he entered the lounge, a few staff members eyed him skeptically, as if expecting an apology for his existence. Daniel met their gazes calmly, offering a nod of quiet grace. He owed them nothing, not anger, not bitterness, not even explanation. The air crackled with tension as the massive jet bearing the Wings of Hope emblem touched down. Passengers leaned against the glass walls, whispering and speculating. Vanessa Cooper stood rigid near the entrance, her face a portrait of contained panic. Daniel didn't rush to meet the plane. He waited, grounded, composed, a living contradiction to the chaos swirling around him. As the door of the jet opened, and Elizabeth descended with regal calm, Daniel felt a shift in the atmosphere, a collective inhalation, a silent understanding dawning on the faces of those who had judged him so quickly. And yet Daniel's heart remained untroubled. This moment was never about revenge. It was about truth revealing itself, not through anger or triumph, but through the quiet, undeniable weight of dignity. Tomorrow the world might sing his praises, but today, Daniel simply stood there, a simple man, full of complicated strength, waiting to welcome his wife home. And that, he realized, was more than enough. The runway gleamed under the late morning sun, as the silver Wings of Hope jet taxied to a gentle stop. A soft murmur rippled through the gathered crowd at the private terminal. Eyes, once heavy with disdain, now sparkled with curiosity and unease. From the shadows of the waiting area, Daniel Hartman stood quietly, observing, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jeans. No fanfare, no grand entrance, just a simple man holding the kind of patience that comes from knowing who he truly was. As the cabin door opened, the first figure to emerge was not a bodyguard or an assistant, but Elizabeth Monroe Hartman herself, confident, composed, and unmistakably powerful without a trace of arrogance. She didn't hesitate. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Daniel. A warm smile curved her lips as she descended the stairs with deliberate grace. In the hush that followed, Elizabeth crossed the tarmac, her heels clicking rhythmically, until she stood just inches away from Daniel. Without a word, she reached out and drew him into a fierce, unashamed embrace. Cameras flashed, gasps filled the air. The realization swept across the crowd like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a man in tattered jeans. This was Daniel Hartman, co-founder of Wings of Hope, husband to a woman who had built humanitarian empires and technological revolutions. Vanessa Cooper, standing stiffly nearby, felt her knees weaken. The pieces clicked together painfully. The humble man she had humiliated was not just someone. He was someone who had quietly changed thousands of lives, expecting nothing in return. Mr. Blake Anderson stepped forward then, the very founder of the Airline, whose wealth and reputation spanned continents. His face, often stoic, now bore the lines of genuine remorse. He extended his hand to Daniel, a gesture laden with humility. "Mr. Hartman," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "On behalf of this airline and everyone standing here, today, I offer you my sincerest apology. We failed you, not because you didn't belong, but because we forgot what true greatness looks like." Daniel hesitated for just a moment before shaking Blake's hand. His grip was firm, but there was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet forgiveness that seemed to echo louder than any reprimand ever could. Vanessa stepped forward, trembling. I'm so sorry," she stammered, tears brimming in her eyes. Daniel simply nodded, his voice gentle. It's never too late to see differently. The crowd, once so ready to judge, now stood in awe, not just of Daniel's achievements, but of his unshakable character. And as Elizabeth slipped her hand into his, they walked together past the stunned faces, heading toward a future defined not by appearances, but by the immeasurable weight of compassion. Yet this was only part of the story, because what happened next would leave everyone even more breathless. As Daniel and Elizabeth made their way toward the main terminal, a ripple effect began to unfold, silent yet seismic. Passengers who had once sneered at Daniel now shifted awkwardly in their designer shoes, avoiding his gaze. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others dared to meet his eyes, offering tentative, silent apologies. Yet Daniel asked for none of it. He moved through them not with resentment, but with an almost disarming peace, as if he understood that true dignity was never something others could take away. In a sudden, unexpected gesture, Blake Anderson turned to the assembled staff and passengers and announced, "Today, this airline will donate $1 million to Wings of Hope, in honor of the man who reminds us all that greatness is measured not by what we wear, but by how we live." A stunned silence fell over the crowd, and then, slowly, applause began. It started with a single pair of hands, a young steward at the back, and then grew, swelling until the terminal itself seemed to echo with it. Daniel smiled, a small, tired smile that spoke of deeper victories, far beyond public approval. He leaned toward Elizabeth and whispered, "It's not about the money." "I know," she replied, squeezing his hand. "It's about hope." Nearby, Vanessa wiped her eyes, shaken to her core. She would carry the lesson of that day with her for the rest of her life, not as a stain of shame, but as the beginning of her own quiet transformation. As Daniel and Elizabeth boarded their car, ready to leave behind the glittering world that had judged too quickly, Daniel glanced once more at the runway stretching out before them. In his heart, he felt no triumph over those who had mocked him, only a deeper resolve to continue building bridges in a world too eager to build walls. The next chapter of Wings of Hope had already begun, fueled not by anger or revenge, but by the enduring, unstoppable power of kindness. And somewhere, in distant villages and forgotten towns, children he had never met would soon have a second chance at life, all because a simple man refused to let cruelty define him. The true legacy of Daniel Hartman wasn't wealth, wasn't fame. It was something far rarer, a heart unwavering, even when the world tried its best to break it. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures or the public apologies that defined the story. It was the quiet, stubborn kindness of a man who chose not to become what the world expected of him. Daniel Hartman's journey was a reminder that true greatness often hides behind the simplest appearances, that the most extraordinary souls walk among us in plain clothes, carrying burdens we cannot see, and dreams we could never fully understand. He could have fought back with bitterness. He could have humiliated those who humiliated him, but he didn't. Instead, Daniel chose to forgive. He chose to heal. He chose to build. And in doing so, he left an imprint on everyone who crossed his path, not by force, but by the gentle, undeniable weight of his humanity. How often do we miss the extraordinary because we're too busy looking for the obvious? How often do we judge, dismiss, and belittle, unaware that the person we're ignoring carries more courage, love, and strength than we could ever imagine? The world doesn't need more status. It doesn't need louder voices or bigger shows. It needs more Daniels, people who believe in goodness, even when it costs them everything. Before you rush to judge the next simple person you meet, pause, look deeper. You might just find a story that could change your life, if only you have the heart to see it. Because sometimes, the ones who look like they have the least are the ones who have the most to give. And when you realize that, you'll understand a secret that Daniel already knew. true wealth isn't measured in dollars or fame. It's measured in how much love you leave behind in the lives you touch.